You've heard the story before. In the beginning, there was Adam, and then from his rib came Eve, the first man, the first woman, a garden, a serpent, a fall from grace. That's the version we were all taught. Clean, controlled, simple. But what if I told you that's not how it really started? What if I told you there was another woman, one who came before Eve, a woman who wasn't made from a rib? She wasn't created second. She was made equal, from the same earth, the same breath, the same power. Her name was Lilith. And unlike Eve, she didn't follow the rules. She didn't stay silent. She didn't bow. She said no, not to a man, not to a serpent, but to the very system that tried to define her. That's why you've never heard her story, because they buried it, erased it, turned her into a warning instead of a lesson. But Lilith didn't disappear. She became something else, a shadow in the background of scripture, a whisper in old myths, a demon in the dark corners of forgotten books, a name no one dared to speak. Because if you knew who she really was, you might start asking the wrong questions. Or maybe the right ones. Like, why did they need Eve to be obedient? Why did the first woman's voice need to be silenced? Why was strength written as sin? You see, Lilith's story isn't just about an ancient myth. It's about something deeper, something that still echoes through every system we live in today. Her story is about what happens when someone chooses power over obedience, when someone chooses freedom over comfort, when someone, especially a woman, refuses to play the role they've been given. And make no mistake, Lilith refused. In the oldest versions of the creation story, stories that existed long before the final version of the Bible was shaped, Lilith wasn't a monster. She was a mirror held up to power, and power didn't like what it saw. So they changed her. They took the woman who walked away and turned her into a warning. They said she was evil, that she stole babies, that she slept with demons, that she whispered nightmares into men's ears while they slept. They made her terrifying, because the truth was even scarier. A woman who didn't need permission, a woman who left paradise on her own terms. That's the part they couldn't let survive, and so they buried it. They replaced her with a woman made from a man's rib, software quiet, obedient, a helper, not an equal. They gave us Eve and erased Lilith. But history has a strange way of leaving fingerprints behind, and Lilith's prints are everywhere. In ancient Sumerian tablets, in early Jewish mysticism, in the whispers of Kabbalah, in the art they tried to burn, and in the hearts of anyone who's ever felt that quiet, burning voice inside that says, I was made for more than this. Lilith's story is not a fairy tale. It's not about rebellion for the sake of rebellion. It's about truth. A truth that challenges everything we've been told about gender, obedience, faith, and power. Because if there was once a woman who walked away from paradise because she refused to be controlled, then maybe we've been asking the wrong questions about what paradise even is. Maybe paradise isn't obedience. Maybe it never was. Lilith forces us to look deeper, past the polished surface of religion, past the fear-based teachings, and into the forgotten pages of human history. And what we find there is a woman who chose herself, not because she was selfish, not because she was sinful, but because she knew what she was worth. This is not just a story about the past. It's a story about now. Because the same systems that erased Lilith still exist. They still rewrite stories. They still twist power into sin. They still demonize anything or anyone that won't stay quiet. Lilith is the part of the human story that reminds us that not all who walk away are lost. Some are just done being controlled. So now the question is, what really happened to Lilith? Where did she go? And what does her erasure tell us about the stories we've accepted as truth? That's what we're about to uncover. Because this isn't just the story of a forgotten woman. It's the story of what they tried to hide about power, freedom, and the divine feminine. It's the story of the first woman who refused to kneel and what happened next. Now that the door is open, let's step into the story they didn't want you to know. Long before Eve, before the serpent, before the fall from grace, there was another woman in the garden. Her name was Lilith, And she wasn't made from a rib. She wasn't crafted from a piece of Adam. According to ancient Jewish texts, especially from mystical traditions and midrashic writings, Lilith was made from the same clay as Adam, the same dust, the same divine breath. They were equals, not just in body, but in soul. She stood beside him, not behind, not beneath. She wasn't made to serve, she was made to be. Whole, untamed, free. But that freedom didn't last long. You see, even in the paradise of Eden, hierarchy found its way in. Adam wanted to lead. Lilith was expected to follow. He wanted control. She wanted balance. But Lilith wasn't created to submit. She wasn't designed for silence. So when Adam tried to dominate her, not just physically but spiritually, she said something no one had ever dared say before. "I will not lie beneath you." Simple words, but they shattered everything. She wasn't just rejecting a position. She was rejecting the idea that she was less than him, that being a woman meant being second, that creation came with a chain of command. Adam didn't like that. Neither did the angels. According to legend, Lilith called upon the true name of God, a name so sacred, so powerful, it gave her the ability to leave Eden entirely, not fall, not be cast out, but walk away. Let that sink in. She didn't sin. She didn't eat the fruit. She didn't speak to the serpent. She made a choice. Lilith chose her own path, her own power, her own soul, even if it meant leaving paradise behind. And that choice, that was the real problem. Because a woman who chooses herself doesn't fit the script. She doesn't make a good lesson in obedience. She doesn't make a good wife, servant, or example. She becomes a threat. And so, the story was rewritten. Lilith vanished from the Genesis we know today. In her place, a new woman was formed, this time from Adam's body. Not side by side, but from a rib, from underneath. Eve was the version that fit the message, a helper, gentle, malleable, created after man, and blamed for the fall. Meanwhile, Lilith, the one who refused to bow, was pushed out of the story entirely, erased from mainstream scripture, branded a demon in later writings. But pause for a moment. Ask yourself, why was her choice so dangerous? Why would a woman choosing to leave, choosing not to submit, be so terrifying that the only way to deal with her was to erase her? Because if Lilith was allowed to exist in the story, then obedience wouldn't look like virtue anymore. It would look like fear, and submission wouldn't look like love. It would look like control. Lilith was the mirror that showed what was really happening, and mirrors can be dangerous in the wrong hands. So they turned her into something else. They said she consorted with demons, that she flew through the night, that she preyed on newborns. They painted her as a monster, not because she was evil, but because she said no. And if the first woman could say no, what might others start saying? It's no coincidence that her name only survives in the margins of ancient texts, in footnotes, side stories, and mystic commentaries. They couldn't erase her completely because truth has roots, but they buried her as deep as they could. Still, in those buried places, her voice survived. The alphabet of Ben Sira, a text from around the 9th to 10th century, tells one of the earliest written accounts of Lilith's creation and departure. It shows a battle not of good versus evil, but of freedom versus control. Not rebellion for destruction, but rebellion for dignity. Lilith wasn't trying to dominate. She was trying to be seen, to be heard, to be equal. And that made her dangerous to a world built on hierarchy. Think about what this means. If the first woman was erased for choosing freedom, then everything built on that erasure still carries the mark of that fear. It means submission was not our original nature. It was the story we were told after the real one was buried. Lilith's disappearance wasn't just about silencing a woman. It was about rewriting the origin of human power itself. Because if we came from a woman who walked away from paradise to keep her soul intact, then we were never meant to be ruled. We were meant to choose. And that idea is still too powerful for some to accept. So Lilith became a ghost in our stories, a warning in the shadows. But for those who look deeper, She's not gone. She's still here, not as a demon, but as a question. A question will continue to follow in the next part of her journey, because this isn't just about her past. It's about everything they've built since she left. So what happens? When a woman chooses her voice over silence? When she walks away instead of obeying? When she refuses to kneel, even to paradise itself? They don't forget her. They rewrite her. That's exactly what happened to Lilith. She didn't disappear after Eden. Her story didn't end when she said no. In fact, it was just beginning, but not the way you'd hope. After Lilith walked away, the people in power didn't just let her go. They couldn't, because if her story survived in its original form, a woman made equal, choosing freedom, it would unravel the entire foundation of control, of patriarchy, of obedience masked as holiness. So instead, they did something darker. They didn't erase her completely. They turned her into a monster. Lilith, once the first woman, became a warning. In the alphabet of Ben Sira, an old Jewish text from the early Middle Ages, we see this transformation unfold. This is where the Lilith we know today begins to take shape, not as a woman, but as a demon. According to the story, after leaving Eden, Lilith is chased by 3 angels sent by God. They demand she return to Adam. She refuses again, so they punish her. They say that for every day she stays away, 100 of her children will die. And when she still won't submit, they brand her as a baby killer. Yes, the story changes drastically. Now Lilith becomes the cause of infant death, a creature who steals newborns in the night, a threat to every mother, every family, every man's peace. But ask yourself, where did this come from? There's no record of her committing any crime in Eden, no sin, no betrayal, no fall. Her only act was disobedience. She didn't kill, she didn't lie, she left. And yet, now she's painted as the darkest thing a woman can be. Not a rebel, not even just a demon, but a killer of children. Why? Because nothing scares power more than a woman who says, "I don't belong to you," especially if other women might hear her. By turning Lilith into a child killer, the story weaponized fear, not just to erase her, but to make sure no one ever tried to follow her path. They didn't stop there. In later rabbinic texts, Lilith becomes the embodiment of lust and seduction, a night demon who tempts men in their sleep, a succubus, a destroyer of male virtue. She shifts from one nightmare to another, always dangerous, always wicked. But the pattern is clear. They didn't just hate her power, they feared what her freedom revealed. Because once you know you're allowed to say no, you can't unknow it. Lilith wasn't destroyed, she was transformed, not by her own actions, but by the hands of those who needed her gone. They twisted her into the exact opposite of who she was. A woman who refused control became a demon of chaos. A woman who left oppression became a predator. A woman who stood her ground became a curse upon generations. And here's the real truth. That transformation wasn't just about Lilith. It was about every woman. If they could turn her into a demon, then any woman who spoke too loudly, loved too freely, thought too deeply, questioned too often, could be next. The story of Lilith became a tool, a myth to scare women into silence, a bedtime story that taught girls not to be like her, not to want more, not to challenge men, not to leave paradise, even if that paradise was built on submission. But let's flip the lens for a moment. What if the demonization of Lilith isn't a story about her fall, but their fear? What if she was never evil, just free? What if her refusal wasn't sin, but sovereignty? And most of all, what if all the things they said made her a demon? Independence, strength, sexuality, self-worth were actually signs of the divine feminine. Because here's something no one talks about. The version of Lilith as a demon doesn't exist in the original Genesis. It only shows up later, once men started writing warnings into the margins of old stories. Once control became more important than truth. Once freedom became too dangerous to leave unpunished. Her transformation wasn't organic. It was political, religious, cultural. It wasn't that she was evil, it's that her freedom made them feel small. And so, they covered her in shadows. But shadows can't erase light. They only prove that light existed. Even in demon form, Lilith survived. She was too strong to be killed, too wild to be caged, too real to be forgotten. In a strange way, the very people who tried to erase her kept her alive by fearing her name. And that fear still echoes today. In every place where women are taught to be silent, in every system that punishes independence, in every religion that hides the feminine side of the divine, Lilith's story didn't end in Eden. It didn't end in exile. It didn't even end when they called her a demon. Because the deeper you look, the more you realize. The demon they feared wasn't Lilith at all. It was the truth. And the truth is this. When a woman refuses to be controlled, they don't destroy her, they rewrite her. So far, we've followed Lilith from creation to exile, from first woman to forgotten to feared. But here's the deeper question that pulls it all together. Why was she such a threat? Why did they work so hard to twist her image, bury her story, and rewrite her truth? Because Lilith did something the world still struggles to accept. She had power and didn't ask for permission. She didn't wait to be chosen. She didn't wait to be allowed. She didn't need approval to exist as she was. Lilith represented something ancient and dangerously pure, the feminine that is wild, wise, and whole, not because someone told her she was, but because she always had been. And in a world that depends on obedience, that kind of energy is terrifying. Because if Lilith could walk away from Eden, from comfort, from a man, from paradise itself, just to stay true to herself, then what else might we walk away from? What illusions would fall? What lies would crumble? You see, Lilith didn't just refuse Adam. She didn't just challenge a man. She challenged the entire system that believed women should be quiet, soft, and small. She refused to play her role. She said no to submission, not just in the body but in the soul. And that's why her story had to be rewritten. Because her presence was more than defiance, it was proof. Proof that power doesn't have to come from domination. That truth doesn't have to be tamed. That a woman could be complete without being controlled. She was a living contradiction to everything that system stood on. And for systems built on power over, nothing is more dangerous than power from within. Let's pause here. What exactly does power without permission mean? It means not waiting to be seen before you believe in yourself. It means choosing your path even when others say that's not your place. It means owning your voice, your mind, your body, not because someone gave it to you, but because it was always yours. Lilith lived this truth. She didn't demand a throne. She didn't seek revenge. She didn't ask to be feared or worshipped. She simply was. And that was enough to threaten a world addicted to control. Because once someone like Lilith exists, you can't unknow her. You can't unsee that a woman doesn't need to be ruled. You can't forget that a soul can walk away from comfort and still be whole. You can't pretend submission is natural once you've seen freedom lived. That's the real danger. Not in what Lilith did, but in what she revealed. She revealed that paradise built on control isn't paradise at all. She revealed that silence is often mistaken for peace, that obedience is often praised while courage is punished, that power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it walks away quietly and still changes everything. This is why they painted her as a demon. This is why they turned her name into a curse. Because even in absence, she was too powerful. They couldn't control her, so they told others to fear her. They couldn't contain her, so they called her evil. But beneath the demon mask was a woman who knew her worth. A woman who didn't bend, even to God's angels. A woman who didn't trade her voice for a man's comfort. A woman who didn't shrink herself to be loved. Can you imagine what that meant? In a time when women were property, when their stories were written by men, for men, when the sacred feminine was being erased, one line at a time, Lilith wasn't just an individual. She was a symbol of the divine feminine in its rawest, purest, most untamed form. And that scared them. Because if people remembered her truth, they might start questioning other things too. What if women weren't made from men? What if the fall wasn't caused by a woman's curiosity, but by the fear of her power? What if the divine wasn't only masculine? Lilith's presence opens the door to all those questions. And once the door's open, it can't be closed again. This is why she still echoes through time, why her name appears in ancient spells, hidden manuscripts, whispered stories. Not because she was a villain, but because truth doesn't die. It goes underground. Lilith is the spirit of every voice that's been told to be quiet, every girl who was told she was too much, every woman who was punished for knowing herself. She lives in every moment someone chooses freedom over comfort, truth over approval, power over permission. And if we look at history, we see this pattern again and again. Burn the witches, silence the prophets, erase the goddesses. Every time the feminine rises without asking first, it's met with fear. Because true power, the kind you don't borrow, steal, or beg for, exposes false power for what it is. Empty. And Lilith was full of voice, full of choice, full of knowing. She didn't break the rules, she left the game entirely. And that's what shook the world. So the next time you hear her name, don't think demon, think mirror. So the next time you hear her name, don't think demon, think mirror. Because Lilith isn't here to scare you. She's here to remind you that you were never meant to be small, that your soul doesn't need permission, that your power isn't something you earn. It's something you remember. And the moment you remember, they can't control you anymore. Lilith was cast out of Eden, branded a demon, buried in silence. But here's the truth they never saw coming. She never left. She simply went underground, into symbols, into whispers, into the forgotten corners of history. She became the hidden code in old myths, the flicker behind the flame, the name that never fully dies. Because you can rewrite a story, but you can't kill a spirit. Before she was turned into a monster by religious fear, Lilith existed long before the Bible was even written. In the ancient lands of Mesopotamia, she was already there, not as a demon, but as a goddess. Thousands of years ago, in Sumerian and Akkadian texts, there are mentions of a female spirit, Lilith, associated with storms, wind, and the wild energy of the night. Not evil, not cursed, but untamed. She was connected to Inanna, the goddess of love and war, a powerful feminine force who ruled both beauty and destruction. And Lilith? She stood beside her as an equal, a guardian, a symbol of chaos and independence. In one Sumerian story, Lilith appears in the sacred Hulupu tree, living freely until the gods try to drive her out. Sound familiar? She is always there, alive in the roots of myth, even before the world tried to silence her. And this is what makes her story so powerful. They erased her from one book, but she kept showing up in others, not as a ghost, as a survivor. In medieval Europe, she became the shadow in folk tales, the woman who knew herbs, the one who lived alone in the woods. They called her witch. They feared her knowledge. But again, she was just free. In Jewish folklore, amulets were created to protect newborns, not from disease, not from nature, but from Lilith. She became the scapegoat for every mystery people couldn't explain. Why babies died, why women miscarried, why men had nightmares. But here's the twist. If she was truly forgotten, why were they still so afraid? Because deep down, they knew. Lilith was never fully gone. She lived on in the cracks, in the hidden symbols, in the margins of ancient books, in the whispers between generations of women. She became part of the lore passed down quietly, not in temples or churches, but in kitchens, in birth rooms, in secret circles. She became a symbol of the feminine that refuses to die. And now she's re-emerging, not as a demon, but as a mirror, for every woman who ever felt the fire inside her, but was told to dim it. In modern feminism, Lilith has returned with force, not because she changed, but because the world is finally ready to hear her again. She stands for the woman who leaves a relationship that doesn't respect her, the girl who questions the story she was told to believe, the voice that breaks the silence even if it shakes, the soul that reclaims her body, her path, her truth. And she's not just found in books anymore. She's on murals, tattooed on skin, woven into poetry, sung in songs. Lilith is no longer hiding, and maybe she never was. Maybe she was always right there, beneath the surface, waiting to be seen again. Because symbols don't die, they sleep, and when the world is ready, they rise. Lilith rising now is no accident. It's a response to centuries of silence, to systems that feared the feminine, to traditions that buried goddesses and replaced them with guilt. Her story lives on not because it was preserved, but because it was too powerful to stay dead. And if you look closely, you'll start to see her fingerprints everywhere. In the stories of the witches burned but never broken. In the rise of voices that were once told to shut up and sit down. In the fire behind the eyes of those who say, I will not be less just to make you more comfortable. Lilith represents a force that's not here to destroy, but to remember. To remember what we lost when we silenced the sacred feminine. She shows us that the parts of ourselves we were told to fear, our strength, our desire, our wildness, were never flaws. They were freedom. And here's the most haunting part. Even in her demon form, Lilith remained powerful. The ones who erased her could not erase what she symbolized. They couldn't stop her name from echoing through the ages. Because the truth is, you can banish a woman from a garden, you can twist her name, you can burn her stories, but you can't unmake what she awakened. Lilith is the breath behind the wind that whispers, you were never meant to be tamed. She is the original flame, not the kind that destroys, but the kind that reminds you who you are. So when we say Lilith survived, we're not just talking about an ancient myth. We're talking about the part of us that refuses to be erased, the part that knows silence is not peace, that obedience is not virtue, that shrinking yourself is not holy. Lilith survived because she became us. They tried to erase her, bury her name beneath centuries of silence, call her a demon, a seductress, a mistake. But Lilith never died. She just became a symbol, because her story isn't just a myth, it's a mirror, a reflection of every woman who's ever been told to sit down, stay quiet, be small. Every time a voice is ignored, a body is controlled, a dream is sacrificed, Lilith rises again. She was the first to say no, the first to walk away, the first to choose herself. And that choice, centuries later, is still shaking the world. Today, Lilith isn't in Eden. She's in boardrooms, where women fight to be heard without being called difficult. She's in classrooms, courtrooms, and kitchens. She's in the girl who says, no, I won't smile for you. She's in the woman who leaves a life that looks perfect on the outside, but feels like a cage on the inside. Lilith is rebellion, but not just for rebellion's sake. She's the fire that lights up when someone decides they're done being less than they are. And that fire isn't evil. It's not dark. It's sacred. Her story still matters because the world still tries to punish women for choosing freedom over approval. And not just women, anyone who refuses to fit inside a box they never asked to be put in. This is why Lilith's story never ended, because the question she asked still echoes. What happens when you choose truth over comfort? When you refuse to be owned, shaped, or tamed? It's the same question faced by mystics, rebels, and outcasts in every generation. And every time someone answers with courage, her story gets retold. Not in books, but in blood. The truth is, Lilith wasn't just the first woman. She was the first to realize that obedience is not the same as peace, that being chosen is not the same as being free, and that sometimes walking away isn't weakness, it's wisdom. She chose the unknown over the unacceptable, exile over submission, fire over silence. That choice came with a cost. It always does. The world will call you crazy, ungrateful, dangerous. They'll say you've lost your way. But the truth is, you've just left their map. Lilith reminds us that not all stories of strength are loud. Sometimes strength is quiet. It's walking away when your whole life begs you to stay. It's standing alone and not apologizing for it. She still matters today because we're still fighting the same battle in new forms. Systems change their names, but not always their rules. The old chains get redesigned, but they still bind. And in the middle of it all, that ancient voice still whispers, you are not here to be small. You are not here to be obedient. You were not made to kneel. In a world that tries to tame you, Lilith reminds you, there is power in not fitting in, there is beauty in walking alone, and there is truth in being too much for people who want you to be less. So if you've ever felt like you don't belong, if you've ever been called too loud, too wild, too hard to love, if you've ever chosen yourself and paid the price for it, you already know her. You are her story unfolding in real time. And that's why she still matters. Because she never really left. She's just been waiting for you to remember who you are. They tried to erase her, to turn her name into a warning, to bury her story so deep you'd forget she ever existed. But Lilith didn't disappear. She became something more dangerous than they ever imagined. She became an idea, and ideas can't be silenced. Her story was never just about demons or rebellion. It was about truth, a truth that lives inside you, the part of you that's tired of being told who you're supposed to be, the part of you that questions the story you've been handed and asks, who wrote this, and who did they leave out? Because here's the thing, if Lilith was really just a villain, why did they work so hard to make you forget her? Why did they rewrite the beginning of the story? And why does remembering her feel like remembering something you already knew, but were never allowed to say out loud? They didn't just bury Lilith. They buried the power to say no, the power to walk away, the power to not be chosen and still be whole. And that should make you wonder, what else have they buried? How many truths have been disguised as myths? How many myths were actually warnings? And how many warnings were meant for people like us? People who feel that something about the world doesn't quite add up? This isn't just about Lilith, it's about you, your voice, your freedom, your right to question everything. Because once you start asking the forbidden questions, you realize how many answers were never really lost, just hidden. And suddenly the old stories don't control you anymore. They wake you up. Lilith's voice was silenced because it was dangerous, not because it was false. And now that voice is echoing again, through you, through all of us, who are tired of half-truths and polite lies. Her exile is over the moment you say, I want to know what they didn't tell me. So if this story stirred something in you, if something in your chest said yes while the world still says no, then maybe you're not here by accident. Maybe you were meant to remember. And if that's true, then don't let the story end here. There are more voices like Lilith's, more forbidden truths buried under centuries of fear, shame, and control. And we're going to uncover them together. So if this resonated with you, if you felt that fire, even for a second, like this video so we know you're one of us. Subscribe so you don't miss the truths they never wanted you to hear. And comment below. What do you think they buried with Lilith? What else have we been kept from knowing? Your thoughts matter here. Your questions matter. Because this isn't just a story, it's a spark. And from here on out, we light the fire.